Hello, it's a great pleasure to record this video for everyone, and big thanks to Martin for requesting it. My name is John Troyer, and I'm co-director of the Center for Death and Society at the University of Bath in Southwest England. Many of you will be familiar, I'm sure, with CDAS's work. Anyway, Martin had asked me to answer a few questions here about the impact of COVID on sort of the research done by people within death studies or working in death and dying. So here goes. So question one, what COVID-related issues has CDAS researched in the last 2 years? So what research have we looked at? Well, a couple of different things. Colleagues Kate Whitthorpe and Hannah Rumble have looked at work around direct cremation or direct cremation, what we call it in the UK. The issue, the research was started before COVID, but certainly the impact of COVID showed up in the research, and I think that what colleagues found, what Hannah and Kate and the group found who were doing the research, was that there was a real uptick in cremation, but also too that one of the reasons that occurred just in general is because there was people preferred having more choice in what went on around that time. Other bits of research, I have been doing research related to COVID that is an extension of the work I do on the history of the AIDS epidemic and the impact of AIDS, HIV/AIDS, and the public health campaigns around HIV/AIDS back in the 80s and 90s in the West, but also then across the globe, for example, in different parts of sub-Saharan Africa. The impact of that work, both public health work and biomedical work, bioethical work on the COVID pandemic, and understanding both differences and then relationships and resonances between those areas. Other areas of work, one of our PhD students, George Gemersha, who's originally from Uganda, has been looking at repatriations of the dead to different parts of Africa. Another of our PhD students, Sam Hooker, has been looking at aspects of home care, home death care, related to people and how COVID has impacted that. Alistair Comery, who's another one of our PhD students, has been looking at care homes and also music people are interested in when they die and how that has been impacted by the pandemic. So in a nutshell, without going too far into it, all of our research has been impacted by COVID, which I think is something a lot of us would understand in one way or another. There's a way to ask, so what happened as a result of COVID? Which brings me to the second question from Martin, which is, what are some of the important results or outcomes of the research? So I think a couple of the bits and pieces of the research are certainly in the direct cremation research by Kate and Hannah and other colleagues. One of the things that is being looked at is the emphasis that many people who are choosing cremation, why they actually are more interested in terms of, say, choice and more control over the funeral service. And I think that has been one of the things that has come out of the COVID experience for many families, was that they felt as if a lot of choices were being made for them. In many cases, they were as a result of public health campaigns or public health laws or rules, whatever it might be. One of the things that's come out of the research that I have been doing around HIV/AIDS and the history of HIV/AIDS is actually been the sort of the long tail of the impact of the AIDS epidemic, which is still happening, to be clear, it hasn't gone away, but how there are a lot of things that occurred in the 80s and 90s in terms of research, in many cases the same researchers. Tony Fauci in America is a classic example, someone who bridges both worlds, but that the impact of that research just in terms of how we think about public health or attitudes in the public about how to deal with things like pandemics. I think that there's been a lot of work that was done in the previous earlier HIV/AIDS epidemic and pandemic that fed into the COVID pandemic that many people aren't even aware of, because it has been relatively invisible how it has been woven in. Anyway, and that's part of a new book project that my editor at MIT Press is very keen for me to work on. So we'll see how that all plans out. Anyway, but that's something that way. Question 3, has COVID-19 led to new trends or attitudes in the way we deal with death in Western cultures, we deal with death? And I think the answer is yes, it has. I mean, I think it is both the same and different. I think that one of the observations, this is more anecdotal, but there is research going on about this, was that I think many families, many people, it's a personal choice, did find actually the use of online tools for the viewing of funerals, particularly as they were spread out around the world in many cases. I think many families found that a much more intimate and actually okay experience in a way they hadn't imagined. That in a sense it made possible participating in the sort of the funeral itself. And then I think that was something that, but for COVID, we might not have seen the online tools used in the way they were. Now, to be sure, the idea of online webcasting has been a phenomena or a tool that's been used. I first came across it in 2007 in the United States. So it's been around for a long time. But I think that as with many pandemics, technologies we have at our disposal, the use of those technologies is accelerated. And I think, so for example, I don't think we're going to see we're not going to see the stopping of the use of video technologies or video tech in that way, because it simply has become a way that many more people are able to participate in the funeral. I'm not saying it makes it better or worse. I'm just simply saying it is a productive tool that isn't going to go away. And I think that's one of the areas that we're certainly going to see that way. Last question then, has COVID-19 led to new trends, customs regarding funerals? I guess that was sort of what I was talking about, the use of these new tools regarding how funerals take place, shifts around where people think about cremation as well as burial. I think as far as attitudes go, which is perhaps more what the previous discussion was asking, attitudes around death and dying. I think that one thing that may have come out of that as well as sort of an exploration of sort of a conflict, a confrontation with mortality, would be, set aside sort of the attitudes about what kinds of technology are acceptable, what kinds of technology are not acceptable to be used, which is an ongoing question, right? Any kind of new digital technology is both good and bad at the same time. There's a long history of that. But I think that anecdotally, I think we've seen this, there's been much more of an understanding that it is important to have, and I hope this is longer term, one's affairs in order, to use an older term, but that it's important to communicate, end of life wishes, certainly end of life concerns with next of kin and family members. Certainly, it's important to understand questions around what kind of emergency or ICU type care do you want, but also it's just important to make sure that family members know where all the important documents are, all the important passwords, and that was all in motion. I want to be clear about that. That was already happening, but it is my sense that perhaps, maybe, and we'll see if it's long running, COVID, the pandemic itself, actually focused a lot more people in trying to accomplish conveying that information in a way that might not have before. The other final thing I'll close on was that I think both in terms of customs, but also perhaps more attitudes, I think that one thing that COVID really did draw open was just the disparity in access to medical care, particularly along socioeconomic lines. And I think that was already there, but it became all the more apparent. And I think that if there's one thing I'm hopeful, is that the experience of COVID will help change attitudes about making sure people have access to care, but also have access to economic conditions that somehow or other ameliorate some of those differences that way. But this will be a long-running question. I think the thing to keep in mind is that it would be really interesting to answer these questions in 20 years. And in fact, I would encourage all of you who are watching this to think about how you would answer these questions or any of the questions Martin is asking, and then go back in 20 years and listen to what you said, read what you said, or think about answering them again, and just see how those answers have changed or stayed the same. Okay, thank you, everyone. Please enjoy the rest of your time. And again, a big thanks to Martin for an opportunity to do this. Okay, goodbye.